According to the article, Reform and Transformation, the Pivotal Role of Food Justice in the U.S. Food Movement, the global food price crisis in 2008 ushered in record levels of hunger for the world's poor at a time of record global harvests, as well as record profits for the world's major agrifoods corporations. In June 2008, the World Bank reported that global food prices had risen 83% in 3 years, and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations cited a 45% increase in their World Food Price Index in just 9 months. Despite a brief drop in the food price index, retail food prices remained high through 2010 and in 2011 when the index spiked again to record levels. According to the United Nations World Food Program, more than 90% of the world's hungry are simply too poor to buy enough food. Some of the planet's most hungry people live in the global north, though hunger is measured as food insecurity and social safety nets are more readily available. Levels of food insecurity in the United States mirror global patterns. More than 50 million people are now food insecure, and 1 in 9 Americans are on food stamps. Food insecurity in the United States is characterized by a nationwide epidemic of diet-related diseases that result in an estimated $240 billion a year in health costs that fall disproportionately on low-income communities of color. In these neighborhoods, food access is often limited to the cheap, high-fat, high-salt, high-calorie, highly processed foods available at gas stations, liquor stores, corner stores, or bodegas, fast food outlets, etc. When available, fruits and vegetables are often of inferior quality and more expensive at these establishments than in supermarkets and grocery stores. In fact, this notion is exacerbated when the grocer in low-income communities offer substandard variety of food products. I have often argued these grocers are where food goes to die. The lack of access to affordable, fresh, and healthy food when combined with pre-existing health disparities in regions and communities with high socioeconomic inequality has led to a dramatic increase in obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, aggressive immunity disorders, and hypertension. Researchers have shown that what is called the food justice movement emerged from several sources, including movements for environmental justice, working-class communities of color dealing with diet-related diseases, critiques of racism in the food system, as well as critiques of racism in the food movement itself. Moreover, the very notion of food justice developed within the context of institutional racism, racial formation, and racialized geographies. Grassroots efforts are fighting back. Take, for example, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, who articulates an explicit analysis of structural racism in the food system and a policy platform that includes eliminating barriers to African-descended participation and ownership in all aspects of the food system, as well as a redistribution of wealth through cooperative community ownership. Accordingly, a radical framework of food justice will assert that economic democracy for underserved communities of color includes the transfer of ownership, property, and leadership to those most negatively affected by the industrial food system. It can be logically argued that these radical roots reflect a long historical genealogy of work of organizations such as the Colored Farmers National Alliance, a cooperative union, also known as Colored Farmers Alliance, to the Black Panther Party. Food was a part of a much larger program for Black liberation and community autonomy as expressed in the October 1966 Black Panther Party platform and program. The first point in the program demanded freedom and the power of the Black community to determine its own destiny. The last point, invoking the Declaration of Independence and calling for a Black plebiscite, was introduced with the statement, "We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace." The platform was radical not only because it addressed the egregious manifestations of racism such as underemployment, economic exploitation, police brutality, and a skewed criminal justice system, but because the Panthers sought to dismantle the capitalist structures of racism. To be sure, the notion of food sovereignty goes beyond ensuring that people have enough food to meet their physical needs. It asserts that people must reclaim their power in food systems by rebuilding the relationships between people and the land, and between food providers and those who eat. With this, it cannot be lost nor ignored that the very ideas central to food sovereignty and the justice movement have deep African roots. These roots are explicitly and implicitly identified in the role of land and food as a foundation for various manifestations of the Africana freedom struggle, particularly its most radical manifestation. Note, researchers have pointed out and mapped the realities that African women who were forced to cross and up and down the Atlantic brought material and intellectual understanding of the science of food, land, and human freedom. African knowledge systems, cosmological and scientific, rooted in the thought and action of African women, supported and bolstered by the protection of African men, not only fueled the very racialized capitalist system which marginalized and continues to marginalize Africana people, but provided a platform for a sustained resistance. Coming from diverse regions and communities, Africans adapted their cultures to the influences and resources they experienced through all forms of enslavement throughout the Americas. Though rations took away the power of choice, the enslaved could supplement their meals by hunting, fishing, and gardening. By the 16th and 17th centuries, West African agricultural science was already well developed and incorporated many of the same crops that showed up in Southern and Northern America, such as rice. Though plantation owners demanded these skills to be used first and foremost on the plantation fields, enslaved Africans also curated their own personal gardens and passed down practices and preferences to their families. Gardening gave enslaved Africans a path to self-determination, a path that also culminated in a sustained resistance that were found in the tactics of maroon communities. It was hard work, as the labor was excruciating. Enslaved Africans tended to their gardens or other food procurement on their own time, mostly at night, after working on the plantation for a full day. The deeply rooted influences, practice, and knowledge that filters throughout discourses on and around food, land, and resistance are undoubtedly rooted in the humanity of Africana peoples. In fact, nowhere is this captured better than how rice made its way to the Americas, first to Brazil and then to the Carolinas. Here is a story recounted by a Brazilian woman. An enslaved African woman, unable to prevent her children's sale into slavery, placed some rice seeds in their hair so they would be able to eat when the ship reached its destination. As their hair was very thick, she thought that the grains would go undetected. However, as they disembarked the slave ship, the planter who eventually bought them discovered the grains. In running his hands through one child's hair, he found the seeds and demanded to know what they were. The child replied, "This is food from Africa." This is the way rice came to Brazil, through the Africans, who smuggled the seeds in their hair. In relation to rice coming to the Carolinas, in 1726, Swiss correspondent Jean Watt noted that it was by a woman that rice was transplanted to the Carolina. Today, we will hear the second keynote address by Lee Penniman. Lee Penniman is co-director and program manager at Soul Fire Farm. Lee has over 20 years of experience as a soul steward and food sovereignty activist, having worked at the Food Project, Farm School, Many Hands Organic Farm, Youth Grow, and with farmers internationally in Ghana, Haiti, and Mexico. She co-founded Soul Fire Farm in 2011 with the mission to reclaim our inherent right to belong to the earth and have agency in the food system as Black and brown people. Her areas of leadership at Soul Fire include farmer training, international solidarity, food justice organizing, writing, speaking, making it rain, and anything else that involves heavy lifting, sweat, and soil. She is author of Farming While Black, Soul Fire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land, which details her experiences as a farmer and activist, how she found real power and dignity through food, and how people with zero experience in gardening and farming can do the same. Our show is produced today in solidarity with the Native, Indigenous, African, and Afro-descendant communities at Standing Rock, Venezuela, Corporation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Brazil, the Avalon Village in Detroit, Colombia, Kenya, Palestine, South Africa, and Ghana, and other places who are fighting for the protection of our land for the benefit of all peoples. Enjoy the program.
They started with a mission to end racism in the food system and reclaim our ancestral connection to land. As co-executive director, Lee is part of a team that facilitates powerful food sovereignty programs, including farmer training programs for Black and brown people, a subsidized farm food distribution program for people living under food apartheid, not food deserts, but food apartheid, note that, y'all, and regional organizing towards equity in the food system. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's our energy like, y'all, to bring to the stage my sister, my comrade, revolutionary, beautiful goddess, Leah. Clap it up for Leah, y'all.
Hi, everyone. So I'm terrified because I actually care deeply about all y'all. Usually I'm not scared by this kind of stuff, but can we actually stand up and face the east so we can acknowledge our ancestors, please? The east is this way. I looked on Google Maps. So none of us got here by ourselves. I certainly pay homage to my farming ancestors, Sarah Jackson and Elizabeth McTermott, and invite each of you to, at the count of three, say the name of an ancestor who sacrificed something so you could be here today, and we will offer some maize to the ancestors and to Mother Earth. 1, 2, 3. Elizabeth McTermott. Ashe. Thank you. We also want to pay homage and respect and offer our humility and gratitude to the Okanichi band of the Saponi Nation, who are the rightful owners of this land. And I also want to shout out the Stockbridge Munsee band of the Mohican Nation, who are the sovereign owners of the land upon which Soulfire Farm sits. And remember that it's not enough just to name, but also to ask what each of us are doing towards indigenous land sovereignty and repatriation and the healing of the original sin of this nation, which was the genocide and theft of land. And I want to also echo my comrade Dara's Bethane. This is the Soulfire team, or part of the Soulfire team. And I would love for Jess, Letitia, the whole Soulfire team, if you could stand, because this is really our book, and we recognize. And so you all can stay standing, and then all alumni of Black, Latinx, Indigenous Farmers Immersion, Train the Trainer, and you can stay standing, and everybody who contributes to this book, whether you made the cover, your pictures in there, you gave me a quote to add, your farmers represented, if you mentored me at any point or gave me advice about this book, if you could stand and be recognized. And finally, everyone who's Black and loves the land, if you could stand up. Ashe, and thank you. Yeah, if anyone tells you that they are the movement or that they farm by themselves, they're lying. So this is really our thing, and I'm honored and humbled and really grateful that you want to read the words that came through me, but there are words. So a little bit about Soulfire. My elders in Ghana, my mentors, the Queen Mothers, taught me this very important proverb, which is Late Eche Nonoza. Can you all say that? Late Eche Nonoza. So every project needs to have 3 pillars, 3 stones, or the cooking pot is unstable. And so for us, the first pillar that we're working on at Soulfire Farm is about healing the lands, inviting, as my sister Larissa says, inviting back the life into the soil by using Afro and Afro-Indigenous practices, and all the bounty that we harvest from this sacred land, from the 72 acres that we steward, is boxed up and feeds 100 families, about between 300 and 400 individuals living under food apartheid using a sliding scale model. So people pay what they can afford, people don't get kicked out for not having money, and the boxes go right to the doorstep of people's homes thanks to our farm team every Wednesday. So that's the most important, foundational stone of the 3 stones. The second stone under our cooking pot is about education, training, support, mentorship for the next generation, the returning generation of Black and brown farmers. I really believe that when many of us, descendants of the Great Migration fled the Red Plains of Georgia, we left a little bit of our souls behind. And so BLFI and our other programs are a chance to reclaim that connection in a culturally relevant space. So we get down to some real nerdy science, like cation exchange capacity and mineral content and amaranto, but we're also talking about the whole history of our people and using our indigenous and ancestral technologies to heal from all that trauma. And so we now have over 500 people come through the program, and almost everyone is growing food for their community, taking leadership in the food system. And this includes youth too. We have a youth immersion, and thanks to Amani, we have Soulfire in the city, so folks are gardening in their backyards, doing canning with Ellen. That's our second stone. And then the third stone we're working on at Soulfire has to do with reparations. There's trillions of dollars and millions of acres of land owed to Black and Indigenous people. And reparations means repair. It's not like y'all are bad and colonizing bad people, but it's really about how do we restore. And so we're doing organizing nationally with the Field Food Alliance, regionally working on a land trust with the Northeast Farmers of Color to try to bring those resources back to descendants from whom they were stolen. We've had 7 folks get farms and resources through our reparations project, Black farmers, which we're super excited about. And we extend that reparations work beyond borders. These are my maternal lineage is Haitian. This is a Seed Savers Co-op as part of the peasant movement in Haiti. They've done some powerful work resisting Monsanto. So we're really trying to both take the boot off their neck in terms of policy, but also the resources we have, bringing them back across those fake borders so that people can engage in their sovereignty work. So that's a little bit about us. And we learned a lot doing this, just like y'all learn a lot doing what you do. And so Farming While Black, the book, the project, really comes out of a desire to not be gatekeepers to the knowledge that we've accumulated over time and the skills. I know when I was 16 years old and I first started farming, I would go to Northeast Organic Farmers Conference, all that, and like, all the presenters were white, and all the books that you could get from Chelsea Green were from mostly white men, certainly all white people. And I was wondering if I belonged, like if I was a race trader, if there was any place for Black people on the earth, if we contributed anything to that. There were no books about us except for Requiems, the Black farmers about to disappear. That was the only kind of books I could find. So this book uses we language. It's a homecoming call. It's a heart song, really to uplift those who remember the truth. And when I say those who remember the truth, hopefully we all know by now that our ancestral mothers braided seeds of okra and millet and rice and sorghum. They braided melon seed into their hair before being forced to board transatlantic slave ships, right? Believing against odds in the future of tilling and reaping on soil, in the face of unimaginable horror, believing in their descendants and wanting to pass on a legacy. And so they stored in their hair the seeds that they've been saving for thousands of years. It's my belief that in addition to storing the physical seeds in their hair, our ancestral mothers also stored the technologies of how to be in harmony with the earth and community. How to test soil with your tongue. How to test soil with your fingers. There is technology for knowing soil science more complex than so-called Western technology that comes entirely from the senses. Also in our hair, we braided the knowledge of vermicomposting in African dark earth. Right? So the story goes that Cleopatra believed that the worm was sacred, and she would put you to death, she'd have you put to death if you hurt an earthworm. And that in the Nile River Valley, that the amount of worm castings was 200 times the surrounding area. Right? If you go to Ghana and parts of Nigeria, the women have created African dark earth. So this is like terra preta. It's a combination of bone char and food scraps and ash from cooking fires, and you can actually age the community by the depth of the African dark earth. That's how invested our people were in the soil. That's the knowledge that was braided into their hair. Polyculture. You know, permaculture is the rebranding by college-educated white men of our technologies, right? So the idea of a jardin la cour, like a garden with trees and herbs surrounding it. Fanyaju, the terracing of East Africa. These were the technologies of intercropping that were braided into our hair. The hoe. I am obsessed and in love with the hoe. It is the most versatile tool. It is the oldest tool. Came from Africa. You can use it in the mountains. You can use it in the swamps. You can till with it, primary tillage. You can cultivate with it. You can harvest with it. The knowledge of the hoe. And I'm not talking about the Home Depot style ones. I'm talking if you go abroad, you know, if you go to the Caribbean, you get those heavy things. I'm always trying to smuggle them into the country, and that's interesting. Our knowledge of irrigation, the oldest irrigation systems in the world, including the irrigation of the Sahel Desert, that people did by digging through bedrock in a system called Bogara and irrigating millions of farms. Rice cultivation, transplanting itself, you know, the idea of starting a seed somewhere and taking really good care of it and moving it to another place, that's knowledge that was braided into our hair. Our relationship with animals, with fowl, 10,000-year-old relationships with the guinea hen. And the concept of rotational grazing, where you have your animals there for a certain amount of time, and then you move your crops into the land where the animals have fertilized, and the animals have removed the pests. We brought that with us. Our food preservation methods. You can store a tomato in ash, and it will be fresh 6 months later. You can ferment cassava into gari. You can smoke a fish. So these are the memories and technologies of how to have your food all year round, even in the dry season. Mounding. The Ovambo people of Namibia, 10 by 5 rectangular beds, irrigation canals in between. During Hurricane Sandy in 2012, our use of this mounding system literally saved our farm because a flash flood came through the forest and threatened to wash away all the topsoil in what we call our sections 1 and 2. And so we had mounds though, and so we had to go out still at midnight with our children with shovels and dig ditches. But then we were able to channel that water in between the beds and slow it down so that we didn't lose our whole farm. These are the technologies that were braided in our hair. Working together. Dokwe in the Dahomey region, or Kom Beats in Haiti, that's when I come over to your house on Saturday and help you plant your beans, and the next week you come over to my house, right, and help me plant, and then our harvest is staggered and we can help each other out. And by the way, when you come over, there'll be soup for you, and there'll be songs for you. That's what we brought with us. We brought with us an anti-capitalist economy, the susu. The idea that you pool your money together, right? And then everybody can take turns taking out the money that they need to invest capital. We started some of the first credit unions based on this concept of the susu ceremony. I had an elder of mine in Ghana incredulously ask me when the last time I visited if it was really true that in the United States people would plant and expect to harvest and not say a single prayer or make a single offering or a single dance to the earth. And they're like, no wonder y'all are sick. You're not going to get anything good on that. We have our millet ceremony. We have our manjeyan ceremony. We have our planting ceremonies. This is what we brought in the seed rings in our hair. But the enslavers and the colonizers tried to make us forget, right? They tried to make us forget who we were and take everything from us. Because the food system isn't broken. It was built on stolen land and stolen labor. It continues to be built upon stolen land and stolen labor. So from genocide and theft of land through enslavement, through sharecropping, convict leasing, the so-called H-2A yes worker program, food apartheid, none of that is an accident. The system was designed to continue to benefit the colonizer. So this started in 1455 with Pope Nicholas, right, Catholic Church, that said, go ahead, if you're a white Christian, you have the right to enslave, colonize, and pillage all heathen nations. So that was the start of this imperialist capitalism that was going on. But it was upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1823, the McIntosh case, that basically robbed and stripped all Native people of the right to land by law. And then upheld again many times, most recently in 2005 when the Oneida Nation sued New York for rights to their ancestral territories that were denied under the doctrine of discovery. They said, you don't have rights to land. But I don't bring this up because, oftentimes our narrative is just about oppression, but I want to uplift the rememberers. So between Black and Native folks, there's been a lot of adopted colonizer patterns for sure, from the Buffalo Soldiers to the enslavement of Black people by the Cherokee. But actually more common than that were alliances. So we can talk about the Muscogee Creek, the Black Seminole, the Great Dismal Swamp. We can talk about the Seminole Wars, the alliances between the American Indian movement and the Black Panthers to resist this colonization and displacement. Those are the people who remembered. And many folks in this room are also rememberers carrying on Black indigenous resistance of land theft. Enslavement, 12.5 million of us kidnapped, not for our labor, but for our agricultural knowledge. White folks did not know how to do subtropical and tropical agriculture. They didn't know how to grow rice and cotton and tobacco. Those things do not grow in Europe, right? So the slave catchers would literally go and find the experts in the community and kidnap them. Slavery was brutal everywhere, but in Haiti in particular, the slavery was so brutal. I'm just going to read a quote from a previously enslaved person who escaped. who said, "Have they not hung up men with heads downward, drowned them in sacks, crucified them on planks, buried them alive, crushed them in mortars? Have they not forced them to eat excrement? Have they not thrown them into boiling cauldrons of cane syrup? Have they not put men and women inside barrels studded with spikes and rolled them down mountainsides into the abyss?" We outnumbered white people 10 to 1 and they were scared, so there was a particular brutal form. The life expectancy was 8 years once you got to Hispaniola, right? But we remembered. Cecile Fatima, she remembered. Boukman, Toussaint Louverture. They said, freedom or death, right? And so they literally took fire and their religion and started a revolution against the most powerful army at the time. 1791, it was the French army, Napoleon's army, and they won. They won with the help of Ezeli Dansour, who's a god who was born of the marriage of the Taino people and the black people. That's who she is, and she helped them win, drive the white folks into the sea, and establish the first free black republic and the first nation in the world to outlaw slavery. In 1704, the first police came to being in the United States. They were the slave patrols. When the fugitive slave law came into effect in the next generation, that was nationalized. So the criminal justice system in this country was actually designed to enforce enslavement and the oppression and disenfranchisement of black people. Right? So the movement for Black Lives actually did not start in 2013. Big ups to my friend Patrice, but it actually started in 1865. Because what happened in 1865 was that the black codes came into existence to try to keep people in perpetual slavery after the 13th Amendment. It said basically, vagrancy, that's not having a job, that's illegal now. Loitering, that's standing around, that's illegal now too. So we're gonna round y'all up, put you in jail, and then lease you out back to the plantation. 73% of Alabama's state budget came from leasing out black people in 1866. So in 1865, a bunch of pastors got together in Charleston, South Carolina, and staged a protest against this. They were the first movement for Black Lives. They said we need to abolish the police state and we need to end the black codes, which continues on. So they remember who we are. You already know what Fannie Lou Hamer thanks Dr. White for talking about that. But at the same time, it's the system of neo-slavery. We have sharecropping, right? That's debt peonage, where you're getting into more poverty every year because you don't own your land, you don't own your means of production, and you're totally incumbent upon the white person for these resources. Poverty was so severe that a very rare disease called pellagra devastated the black community. It's a niacin deficiency. It comes from being near starvation. So this is how extreme the poverty was. But many, many people remembered and resisted. The Colored Farmers National Alliance and Cooperative Union had 1.2 million members, and they went on general strike, even though they knew many of their members would face lynching. Fannie Lou Hamer starting the Freedom Farm Cooperative so people had an alternative to sharecropping. Sojourner Truth going to the President of the United States saying we need our own land. She was the first person to make that petition. You remember. Despite all of the oppression of black codes and all of the terrorism that was going on in the system of sharecropping, it's astounding to note that by 1910, black people had saved their Sunday money and purchased almost 16 million acres of land. Astounding. And this was seen as such a threat to the status quo for white folks that a terror campaign, a full-on terror campaign ensued. 4,500 black people were lynched, many of whom were landowners who were being lynched to be put in their place and set an example for what happens if you try to leave the plantation. So I'm going to read to you one excerpt to help understand what happened to that 16 million acres. After midnight on October 4th, 1908, 50-footed white men surrounded the home of a black farmer in Hickman, Kentucky, and ordered him to come out for a whipping. When David Walker refused and shot at them instead, the mob poured coal oil on his house and set it afire, according to contemporary newspaper accounts. Pleading for mercy, Walker ran out the front door, followed by 4 screaming children and his wife carrying a baby in her arms. The mob shot them all, wounding 3 children and killing the others. Walker's oldest son never escaped the burning house. No one was ever charged with killings, and the surviving children were deprived of the farm their father died defending. Land records show that Walker's 2.5-acre farm was simply folded into the property of a white neighbor. The neighbor sold it to another man whose daughter owns the undeveloped lands today. So our land was taken by violence. We didn't leave by choice. But some people did leave in what we call the Great Migration, which I think of as a refugee crisis. And those folks are not to be shamed. The people who came up to Albany from Mississippi and formed the Rap Road community right down the street from our farm. The 200,000 black farmers who went up to the Adirondacks to try to make it in the snow-capped mountains. The folks who made the Combahee River colony, it was all women. The men were off at war. The Pembroke, Illinois, Nicodemus, Kansas, Eatonville, Florida, all those black towns. Those were folks who remembered who we were. Then in 1935, something really dangerous happened. There was a labor vacuum, right? Black folks were leaving. The system of sharecropping was in a slow and steady decline. And the United States had an opportunity to look itself in the mirror and say, this whole food system we've created based on stolen land and stolen labor is in crisis. Are we going to shift it? And they made a decision to find a new population to exploit. Filipino workers, Chinese workers, Southeast Asians, Mexican workers, Jamaican workers through the Bracero program. And to make sure to codify this racial caste system, when FDR went ahead and did the New Deal and put in all those amazing labor laws and Social Security and child protections and the right to unionize, categorically two classes, two industries were excluded from all of those protections. Agricultural workers and domestic workers. Because the senators in the South would not vote for the law if a brown-skinned person benefited in any way. And if you look today at the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, you will see exclusions. That's why a friend of mine who teaches at Ag University out in the Midwest said that he asked his class of all white aspiring farmers, how much would you need to be paid to work in the meat packing plant in our town? And 100% of them said, there's no amount of money that you could pay me. That's Mexican work. So what kind of a food system have we created where it depends on such degrading labor that people who want to be farmers wouldn't do it for any amount of money? That's international terrorism, through trade agreements, through corporate takeovers that forces people off their lands to come and work in subhuman conditions to provide a food system that doesn't even benefit us. But many of us have remembered, right? Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Larry Eaton, the coalition of Immokalee workers in Florida busting up slave ranks and convincing corporations to pay more money so people picking tomatoes can earn more. The late Apopka farm workers in Florida. These are folks who remember, who are organizing for the rights of the folks who grow the food. I just learned recently that in the first generation of white people settling the United States, 50% of the organic matter in the soil was lost to the sky. 50%. From tilling, from not practicing a permanent agroforestry style agriculture or swidden agriculture. Organic matter is life, if we all don't realize. It's the life of the soil. It's the source of all of our food. It holds the carbon and prevents climate change. But some people remembered our ways, right? Dr. George Washington Carver wasn't obsessed with peanut just because it's tasty. It's a legume. It's a magical nitrogen fixer that can quite literally turn air into soil. So he had people covering the soil with cover crops. He was admonishing farmers in his area not to be lazy in the fall. They need to go to the swamps and muck out all that seaweed and delicious earth and compost it and put it back on the soil and return that organic matter. Heal the soil, heal the climate. My farmer comrades in Haiti, after the French and the Spanish stole all their trees and the soil washed into the ocean, are repairing it using ancestral methods of terracing and planting vetiver and trees. When we got up north, it was all good, right? Anyone go on Zillow recently and look up your neighborhood? For many of us, it's outlined in red for undesirable, which is fascinating because that's supposed to be illegal now. But in 1935, the government commissioned maps to be drawn in the communities, right? And used these maps to determine where you could get a loan for your house. Sounds like a simple thing. But black and brown communities were outlined in red as too risky to loan to. So it meant that you couldn't own your home, you couldn't get a mortgage in these communities. 80% of wealth is inherited, generation to generation. Most of that wealth is in the form of property. You don't own property, you don't have intergenerational wealth, right? In my lifetime, the gap between white and black wealth went from 8 to 1 to 13 to 1. So white people, on average, have 13 times as much net worth as black folks in this country right now, very much because of this legacy of redlining. Your zip code determines what you get to eat, the quality of your schools, what you get to pass on to your children, whether you're going to be locked up, whether you're going to be safe. But our folks are brilliant and resisting, and the whole housing movement is more than I'm going to cover right now, but I do want to definitely shout out the powerful and visionary folks like Mama Karen and Baba Malik and Rufus and Demalda Newsom, who saw these blighted areas and said, oh, we're gonna take our agrarian traditions and plant them here and start the urban farming movement. Those are the folks who remembered. So we're talking about land theft, and certainly individuals enacting terrorism on our people is one thing, hooded Klansmen who also might happen to be the sheriff. But the government was in on this too, right? In 1862, the Homestead Act, that was the federal land grants to Western settlers. That was a mechanism for stealing 270 million acres of indigenous land and giving it to white people, starting land grant universities for white folks. And then perhaps the most insidious is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has the obligation to provide technical assistance, loans, and crop allotments and supports to all farmers, categorically denies black people and Native people access to these resources. So there's a drought. White farmer goes to the FSA office, gets a loan for irrigation. Black farmer's application is thrown in the trash. Over generations, the foreclosures, the dispossession. Right? Further, during the civil rights movement, because these USDA agencies are controlled at the county level, they could sharpen these programs into weapons to punish civil rights activity. Oh, did you sign a petition? Did you register to vote? Did I see you at the NAACP meeting? I'm sorry, Mr. Jones. I can't seem to find your application. But credit to our people, in 1999, thanks to the leadership of Mama Shirley Sherrod and Charles Sherrod and thousands of other farmers, we won the largest civil rights settlement in the history of this country against the USDA. And the Sherrods weren't just fighting the government on that front. They started the first community land trust in this country. They're like, we're going to do for ourselves, but also you're not going to screw us over. And granted, it was the largely symbolic victory. $50,000 a farmer is not very much, but very important to recognize and break down the myth that, we as black people just didn't want to farm. We just left because we felt like it. It's like we were driven off by lynching and violence and discrimination and governmental exclusion. Mama White was talking a little bit about this, but I'll just add one story about the role of black farmers in the civil rights movement. My best friend's dad, Donald Halfpenny, who lives in Germany because he is a fugitive from the FBI. He was saying that when he was part of Freedom Summer and Freedom Riders, they would definitely stay with black farmers for sure, where else were we going to stay? But the night riders would try to come for them. The night riders would try to come and pick off these northern activists and throw them in a river. And so the black farmers, of course, they would put up their land for you to get you out of jail. They would pretend to have fake Bible study and the pamphlets were in the Bibles, all this. But also, they cut down trees to cover the roads to prevent the night riders from coming and getting these activists. They altered the landscape and they would act like, I don't know what happened. He was telling me the story recently. That's why it's so important that we own land, that we collectively, I mean, not in the sense of enclosure and private property, but when you have a stake in something, you're able to support your community and support the resistance. And if you're completely dependent on the system that hates you, you lose your footing, right, when you try to support this. We were excluded from the whole economy. So farmers in the South were struggling, especially in the 1950s, 1960s, to try to figure out how to get their share of the market. They couldn't compete with the white farmers and the row crops. So Booker T. Whatley was one of those really innovative thinkers. He had ideas. People thought he was nuts at the time. He would say, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to grow cotton. We're going to grow vegetables and fruits. But just hear me out. We're going to have people from the city come, and they're going to pick them. They're going to pick the fruits, and they're going to pay us to pick the fruits. And I'm going to call it, pick your own. Also came up with the idea of the CSA, right? This is when food hubs were starting in the South, Operation Spring Plant, Mississippi, food hubs. So people were trying to figure out for themselves, how do we step outside of white folks' economy and really think about doing for ourselves, sharing, having cooperatives, having these clientele membership clubs where the consumer is kind of a partial owner of the farm. This is what our people were remembering and thinking about. That one. Food apartheid, right? The system where the color of your skin determines whether you're going to live or die based on the food you get to eat. Are people disproportionately impacted by diabetes, heart disease, obesity, poor eyesight, ADHD? Not because we don't know how to cook, not because we don't want to eat good food, but because if you have a few dollars in your pocket, you can maybe get some KFC or some hot Cheetos, but you cannot get this amazing food that we were enjoying right here. Well, we have rememberers amongst us. Anyone know who these folks are? Yeah. Free breakfast program, 20,000 children every day eating a healthy meal before school. This inspired the federal government's school food program, right? Freedom Food Alliance, many others, all of you getting food out to your communities are the rememberers. But I want to come back to the fact that it's not just the material remembering, right? It's also that psycho-spiritual healing. Because in the process of being brutalized through enslavement and being brutalized through displacement, there's some epigenetic trauma. There's some inherited trauma. So when young folks come out to the farm, it is not uncommon for them to make slavery references the first time they come, right? You're my slaves. And I think that there's a way that we confuse the trauma experienced on the land. As my brother Chris Golden Newsom says, the land was the scene of the crime with the land herself. But we need her. When you touch the land with your bare feet, your ancestors can tell you what you need to be doing. The mycelial networks that connect the mama trees to all the babies and share sugars and minerals and messages, they remind you what you need to do to be in community. And when there's layers of concrete between you and the earth, there's like this aching sense that something's missing, but you can't quite remember what it was or where you left it. So a big part of what remembering is for us right now is healing through that trauma. It's why people like the late brother Yusuf Burgess, who takes all the young folks of New York out to the Adirondacks, out to Soul Fire Farm. It's why the Haitian elders who teach the young people how to balance stones as a way of training their mind to listen to other living beings who are not humans are as much a part of our healing as the people delivering food in so-called food desert neighborhoods, right? Or the people doing CSAs. And I want to bring it back to the seed as well. I loved Mama Ira's beautiful presentation earlier, and just want to shout out all the seed keepers, because when we save our seed, we are carrying on that legacy of our ancestral grandmothers who braided the knowledge and the wisdom and the remembrance into their hair before the atrocity of enslavement. We are carrying on the legacy of all those rememberers who resisted genocide and colonization and enslavement and food apartheid. When we save our seed, it's not just a little packet of DNA. It's our whole story. It's our connection to our people, and it's our connection to the earth. So, my call to all of us in this moment is that we be rememberers. That we not adopt the colonizer perspective of life as a linear shape, but rather as a circle. And that we all claim our place in this story of indigenizing our relationship to land. I want to invite Sister Dara and Brother Malik to help me read this closing poem.
Okay.
Come down here with y'all.
Sure.
So we're each going to take turns reading a line.
See what you can do? Never mind you can't tell one letter from another. Never mind you were born a slave. Never mind you lose your name. Never mind your daddy dead. Never mind nothing.
This here is what a man can do if he puts his mind to it and is back in it.
Stop sniveling, the land said. Stop picking around the edges of the world. Take advantage, and if you can't take advantage, take disadvantage.
We live here, on this planet, in this nation, in this country right here, nowhere else.
We got a home in this rock, don't you see? Nobody's starving in my home, nobody crying in my home, and if I got a home, you got one too.
Grab it! Grab this land!
Take it, hold it, my brothers make it, my sisters shake it, squeeze it, turn it, twist it, beat it, kick it, kiss it, whip it, stomp it, dig it, plow it, seed it, reap it, rent it, buy it, sell it, own it, build it, multiply it, and pass it on.
Can you hear me? Pass it on.
There's no need to worry. Shouldn't be too painful. At last, I see the roses.